Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Rick Rolled. And today we are going to be taking a look at the epic 4X strategy game Eclipse, New Dawn for the Galaxy. It's a game that was produced by Lodopolit Phi, and it was created by Tuukko Takokallio. He is actually a designer from Finland, as well as the board game company there. That's why those names might be a little hard for us Americans to pronounce. But this game is definitely in my top 5 games of all time. I absolutely love Eclipse. It was introduced to me by a friend at a gaming group probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And as soon as I played it for the first time, I knew that this would be one that I would have to own because it was so amazing. And the gameplay was so inventive and wonderful that it was a must. Hey there, Fran or Randy or both. Welcome to the live show. You're just in time. We're just getting started. So Eclipse. I mentioned that it's a 4X game. For some of you, you may have no idea what that means. So the 4 X's in 4X are expand, explore, exterminate, and exploit. And that's what we're going to be doing in this game. We are one of several different species or factions that in a Star Trek or a Star Wars type fashion, we're out there deep in a galaxy far, far away, and we are trying to establish our dominance within the galaxy. So in this game, there are going to be 6 human factions, and there are going to be 6 alien species that you can play as. The human factions are all the same as far as what they start with and their abilities and everything like that, whereas the alien species are all unique, having different things about them than the rest of the species and the humans. So there's some variety to the game in that way. Now, the reason why I have chosen Eclipse for today's video, besides the fact that it is one of my favorite games of all time, is that right now on Kickstarter, they are kickstarting the 2nd edition of Eclipse. It is called Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy. And that Kickstarter will be finishing up in a little over 24 hours. It's going to end at midnight tomorrow night. So there's still time to get out there and back it. And one of the things we're going to be talking about a little later in this video is what are the differences between the 1st edition of the game, which I'm showing you today, and then the 2nd edition, which is out there on Kickstarter currently. So that is something that we'll address to let you know as to whether or not you think it's a Kickstarter that's worth investing in if you think this 1st edition is pretty snazzy. So the game of Eclipse, it is a game that's going to last about 30 to 45 minutes per player. You can play up to 6 players with the base game, or if you happen to have the expansion Rise of the Ancients, you can play up to 9 players. I've never tried that. It seems like an insane thing to do, but you could do it if you have the expansion. You are going to be playing the game over a series of 9 rounds, and in each of those rounds, each player is going to be taking one action at a time until they have decided that they have done enough, they can't do anymore, or they don't want to do anymore, at which case the round is going to proceed through any combat that's going to take place and refreshing the game board, and then it's going to be a rinse, repeat, move on to the next round until you get through all 9 rounds. At the end of 9 rounds, the winner is going to be the person with the most points. And while we are not going to do an exhaustive how to play today and hit every single area of what gives you points and all of that. I will give you the basics, which is, one, it's controlling different sectors of the galaxy. Like down here, we have our starting galaxy area, and all the wood grain that you see around those hexes is just unexplored territory that nobody has discovered yet, but we're going to be bravely discovering later. But you'll notice on these hexes, there are these little yellowish shields with numbers in the middle. So those are victory points there for controlling those hexes. There is also hexes for, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later, but you've got a technology track for your species. And so if you get up into the higher areas of each of your technology trees, you'll get points. Or as Ben says, if someone hits their player board and knocks all their pieces around, you might forget how many actions you have, and who knows, maybe even victory points. Maybe that's an instant win right there. So there's points for technology. There is points for making discoveries in the galaxy. There is all sorts of stuff that gives you points. But the main thing you need to know is points are important. The person with the most points at the end of 9 rounds wins the game. So before we get into how each of those rounds is going to go and the potential actions that you can take, we are going to look at the different pieces and parts of this game, and then we're going to bring it all together for you. So the first thing I want to look at is the player boards. And I'm going to have to stand up here to get this all in the camera. This game, by the way, eats up a lot of table space. Each player is going to have one of these player boards like you see in front of you now. And just the player boards are massive in and of themselves. Each of the player boards, too, let me grab another one here. Here is the player board for the white player. So you can see on this side, this is our human faction on this side. But then if I flip it around, on that exact same player board, there is an alien species. The Mechanima or Machinima, I don't know how you pronounce that. So each of those player boards are big and full of information. Let's take a closer look and see what's on them. So at the very top of your player board, these are your ship blueprints that correspond to your actual physical ships that will be going out on the board and doing combat and things like that. So they start out with certain things in them, whether it's weapons or they've got an energy source, because you gotta have an energy source, some kind of gas to power your ship. They're going to have a drive, because you got to have something that's going to help your ship move forward. And some of them are going to have shielding and hulls and computers and all this different stuff. Essentially, though, without going into all the dirty details of the ship parts, you're going to be building your ship and customizing it throughout the game by adding ship parts and replacing ship parts that are going to either be making your ships maybe more defensive, maybe more powerful in combat. Maybe you'll add more powerful cannons that do more damage, or maybe you'll be adding stuff to your ship that helps you hit other ships better, or make it harder for other ships to hit you, or make your ship faster. And this is one of the things that I absolutely love about this game, is that there is the ability that each player has to customize their ships and their fleet exactly the way that they want. And each game, you can do it completely different from the game that you played before. You'll always start out with the same blueprints, but what you do with your ships after that is totally up to you. And we'll look a little bit more at those ship parts and pieces and how you would upgrade them a little bit later. Next thing on our player board is the technology tree. And, oops, close that. I was trying to wave to Curtis, and I hit another button, and then I didn't know how to get out of that screen. So our technology tree here, this is where we're going to be placing research tiles which we will also look at in just a moment. But the main important thing is that there are 3 different technology trees. There's warfare, there's grid, and there's nano research that we're going to be doing. And as we get higher up in those technology tracks and cover over those spaces, you'll see at a certain point we start to see those shields again with the points in them. So we can get victory points by doing research of the different technologies. And my race in particular, Mr. Elephant looking dude, the Hydra in Progress, that's their jam, man. They love the science. They love to research stuff. Then a little bit below my technology track, I have my population cubes. I know these don't look much like people, but each one of these cubes represents, I wouldn't even say just one person. I would say they represent a big group of people that I'm going to be going out, and then when we go out into space and we explore, we're going to be dropping people on planets so that they can do various things. So I've got 3 basic types of population. I got the orange population track, which that's all about the money. They're going to be producing more income for me. And then I've got the pink technology track, which is science. So the more points I get in science, the more research I can do and the more cool tech I can unlock. And then finally, the brown is for materials. So I'm mining down into the earth with my people from the materials population. And they're going to be producing more steel and iron and whatever else I need to be able to build ships and structures and things like that. And what you'll notice is as I remove squares from the technology tree, there's numbers underneath that. And so the more population I get out there onto planets in the universe, the more of that particular thing that I'm going to get as income. So it's very important that I explore the universe and I start dropping my people on planets, on the different types of planets, so that I can start getting more money, more science points, more materials, so that I can build stuff. I'm going to put those cubes back on the board there. And then right next to my population, I have the action spaces. And again, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but I'm going to be moving these discs from my influence track onto the different spaces of the board to take actions during the action round. But the other thing you'll notice too is under these spots, as I remove discs, you'll see they go from 0 and then they start to get into negative numbers. The reason why that is because running a civilization is expensive. And there's no coincidence that those are orange, just like my income track, what I was showing you on the population track there, is because the more stuff I do, and also, let me come out here back to space, the more sectors of the galaxy I put my influence discs in to take control of and expand my civilization, it's going to cost me more money. So at the end of the round, I'm going to have to pay for all the actions that I took, and I'm going to have to pay for all the sectors of the galaxy that I control, because otherwise people are going to be really unhappy, and I'm going to start going bankrupt and have to shrink back in the galaxy instead of grow, because I have lost the ability to pay the money to keep my civilization going. So that's bad. Don't want that to happen. So you have to think really carefully as you're influencing sectors of the galaxy through exploration and taking actions. There is a price to be paid at the end of every round. So that's what's going to drive people to at some point during the round say, yeah, I think I'm going to pass now, because if I keep on going, I'm not going to be able to afford to pay the bill. And if I can't afford to pay the bill, then I have to start taking influence discs off sectors of the galaxy so that I can pay what I owe. So that's the influence track. And then kind of around the board here on the outside is basically our storage for money, science, and materials. And each of these races starts with a certain amount in the bank. Like the Hydra in Progress starts with 2 materials, 2 money or 2 income, and 2 or 5 science that they can work with. Because again, Hydra in Progress loves science, so they get a lot of science points to start out with. But those are what I can actually spend to build my ships and to research technology. And with the orange there, that's what I'm going to be using to pay the bill when it gets down to the end of the round and I have to pay for stuff. So now let's move on from the player boards and let's move and look at, once again, return to the galaxy. So out here, it doesn't look like much. We just have 3 sectors out there in space that we're currently looking at. You'll notice on this side, I have the white player, who I didn't have enough room on the table really to set up the white player's player board, but they would have their own player board like mine that you saw. On this side, we have me, the blue player, and my little sector of the galaxy. And then in the middle, we have the Galactic Centre. Think of the Galactic Centre as somewhat of the hub of civilization here. It is kind of like the United Nations of space, where with all these different human factions and different alien species out there, we've had some trouble in the past. We've had some war, and we finally settled things down. And so now that we've settled things down, we have the Galactic Council in the center of the universe, and they are very, very heavily armed because they aren't taking any crap from anybody. But we, as different factions or species in the galaxies, might get a little warlike and might decide that we need to take over the center of the universe and be the center of the universe ourselves. So that could happen during the game, and usually does. Now you'll notice there's a lot of, pardon the pun, there's a lot of space out there in between those factions, and that's because in a second when we talk about the action of the game, we're going to be exploring and taking over more of it. And also, as kind of pointed out before, each of these sectors will oftentimes have planets of brown, orange, and pink variety, which are planets that are specifically related to the type of resources that we're trying to accumulate. And there's also sometimes, like in the Galactic Center here, you can see there's also sometimes white planets, which mean that they're good for anything. You can pull population off any of your tracks and go there with them, because they must have ways to generate income and materials and science. So it just depends on what you need most when you take control of those at the time. There's also on these little planets, you'll see these little star-like symbols in the pink and the brown there. Those represent advanced type of spaces. So I can't put my population cubes in there unless I have the advanced technology or mining or income or whatever. And of course, lucky me, as Mr. Science himself, I start with advanced labs. It's a type of technology that I get for free at the beginning, which means I can populate those pink cubes with the star. I can go there. So that's space. And over here, these are the other tiles that we're going to be pulling from as we explore space. You'll notice there's a 1, a 2, and a 3. That's because in the inner ring here, basically everything surrounding the Galactic Center, that's all going to be 1. And then as you get into where our 2 player hexes are, all around that circle is 2, and then everything outside of that is going to be 3. And depending on the number of players, the number of 3 tiles in the game varies. I have many more tiles over there, some of which are Sector 3 tiles, but with just a 2-player setup, you're only going to have 5 Sector 3 tiles that are going to be in play to use. So that is space. That is the player boards. And finally, I'll come over here. This is kind of a shared board where we have available technology, which we'll be talking about in a second. Technically, you're supposed to put your ship parts over here in the bottom of this. I've come up with a little Plano box to organize those because I'm a geek like that, and I put those all in there. And there's some cubes for marking damage on ships and all sorts of stuff. Ancient ships. Because, oh, by the way, did I mention, besides our friendly species and human factions out in the galaxies, there is this mysterious and a little bit dangerous other alien race that is out there that is known as the Ancients, and they have been around for a really long time, and they have some crazy weird technology that we might run into during the game and be able to utilize, but they will also hamper us by populating hexes and that we want to go into. So next we're going to talk about the basic flow of the game. Each round, each player is going to get one of these tiles, which on the front side tells you all about the action phase and what actions you can take. And then on the flip side, it gives you all the phases for the game: action, combat, upkeep, cleanup, and gives them abilities for reactions, which we'll talk about. But first we'll talk about the action phase. There are 6 possible actions that you can take in the game. The first one that we're going to look at is explore. So a very important one. You can pick from your hex anywhere that you have a influence disk, meaning you control that sector of the galaxy, or where you have a ship. I've got a little tiny interceptor here. You pick one of these little, looks like half of a bullseye here. On my home space, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces there that have that, or 4 sides that have that. Those are wormholes. And the galaxy is so vast that the only way we can travel between these vast reaches of the galaxies is by going through connected wormholes. If there's not 2 halves to it, you're not getting through. So if you want to explore, you look at the sector you want to explore. For example, let's say I want to explore in Sector 1. I want to explore right here in this space. I would then go up, I would grab a Sector 1 tile, reveal it, and then I could rotate that any which way that I want to put that in there, as long as it makes a connected wormhole right there to my original space that I'm traveling out of. And so now at this point, I have a connection into this inner ring of the galaxy. And you notice there's some planets there that I can put population on. There's a science planet. There's a money planet. There's a materials planet, although it's advanced mining that I have to get before I can populate that sector. And it's worth 3 victory points. That's all great. Now we're going to talk about the problem. That skull there in the center of that hex, that represents that there's an ancient ship there. There's also kind of a weird shape around that skull. That's actually another good thing. That means there is a discovery token that goes right here on this hex. And discovery tokens, on the back side you can see it's worth 2 victory points. On the other side, there's some kind of goodie that we can get. We don't know what it might be, but if we can actually conquer, I'm going to get the ancient ship here. Gimme. The ancient ship is going to sit on top of that, and those yellow squares with the bursts in the middle are guns, and then he's got that other little circle burst is some armor, some hull that he's got. But I'm going to have to go in there, and I'm going to have to beat that ship up and destroy it before I can go in there and I can either populate that area, or before I can grab that discovery tile. So I've got a ship here. I don't know how confident I feel that my little interceptor, who only has one little gun and no armor whatsoever, I don't know if he's ready yet to go in there and face that ancient cruiser. But with time and research and upgrading my ships, I will eventually be able to come into that sector and kick that ancient cruiser out of there so that I can populate it. But anyways, that was exploration. Now, one caveat to that: if I didn't like the hex that I drew with my exploration action, I could take that hex and throw it in the discard pile. But then that's the end of my turn, and I don't get to draw another. So it's kind of a wasted action. And by the way, as I mentioned down here, if I'm taking that action, I have to take one of my discs and I have to place it on the Explorer. And then that's using a little bit of income. Now, also, each of these actions you can take as many times as you want. So even though I've taken the Explorer action once on this turn, I can do it. I can do it for each action that I use the rest of this round if I really wanted to. So that's exploration. The next thing that I could do is build ships and structures in control hexes. So if I wanted to put out any of my fleet, either my dreadnoughts, those are my big ships, my cruisers, which are kind of middle-sized, or my interceptors, or if I want to build a starbase, or if I want to build some other things, I look here at my board, and each of these ships, down below them, there's a brown circle that tells me how much materials I need to have banked in my storage for me to be able to actually build one of those ships and put it out. So even just to build another one of my little tiny interceptors, it costs 3 materials. And right now, I only have 2 materials, so I don't have quite enough to build that ship yet. But once I build a ship, assuming I had the power to be able to do it, I could take my little interceptor and I could put him in any sector that I control. And now I would have that ship out there as well. The third thing I can do is I can research technology, and that costs science money from my bank there. And I can go over to the technology board, and there'll be different tiles that'll be coming out at the beginning of the game and at the beginning of every round that are available for players to research. And we won't go through all the different technology that is out there that's available. But essentially, I go there and I look. There's a number at the bottom in the pink circle with a slash and another number. The first number is how much it costs, and the number after the slash is the lowest possible price it could be. Because as I fill in those tiles on my tech tree, you'll notice that you've got -1, -2, -3. So those minuses make future technology actually cheaper to buy. And so I could buy some of this stuff for less money or less science cost later. So when I buy a tech, let's just say that I had enough money or enough science, and I was going to buy this technology for the positron computer. I'd take that positron computer. It's a grid technology, so it has to go on here because that matches that row. And so now I have that, and that positron computer, now that I have researched that technology and I know how to build it, I can later put a positron computer into one of my ships. So that positron is a +2, which is a little bit better than the electron computer I have right now. And I could upgrade that a little bit later. Or I could even throw it in the open slot there, and then I could have +3 worth of computer that I have. And I know that since we haven't talked too much about ship parts and what they all do, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Don't worry too much about understanding that level of detail. Just know that you can upgrade your ships with better stuff and make them better. So that is researching technology. The next thing that goes hand in hand with researching technology that we're just kind of alluding to is upgrade ship parts. So I have an upgrade action, and with upgrading, I can put two ship parts into any of my ships. Now there is both the new stuff that I research now. This positron computer is a tile that I can put in there, and there's also just some basic parts up here that you see that you know how to build from the get-go that you can put into your ship at any time. But to get the good stuff, like all those ship parts, you're going to have to research that technology so you know how to do it. But then you take those ship parts and you put them over existing ship parts, or you put them in empty slots in those ships, and then automatically every ship in your fleet that you both have right now and every ship that you build in the future will have that technology in them like magic. So that's upgrading. The next thing we talk about is moving ships. So when I look at my move action, it shows a little ship with 2 arrows in front of it. That means that I can move one ship, its maximum movement, twice, or I can move 2 ships, their maximum movement, once. What do I mean by their maximum movement? When we look at a ship's blueprints, you'll notice like in this interceptor, the nuclear drive there, it has just 1 hex in it. That just means for every point of movement that I give the interceptor, it can only move through 1 hex. I can get, with technology, I can get better drives that either go 2 hexes or 3 hexes with every point of movement. But right now, this guy is just one hex per movement point. So then I'm moving my little ships around hexes in the board through wormholes. So like if I wanted to attack that ancient and be brazen right now, I could take these 2 ships. You know, this one can go 1, and then this one can go 1, and I can move them into that sector. And then at the end of the action phase, they'd have to fight that ancient cruiser, which I would be really nervous about at the moment. But I could do it if I wanted. And then the final type of action we can take after movement is to place influence discs and flip colony ships face up. Or we could also pull influence discs off the board. And influence discs, again, are those little, for me, those little blue circles that I could take and put a disc there if I didn't already have control of it and it's open, or I could remove it. And then when it says colony ships, each player has a certain number of these little tokens here. And basically these are your drop ships that are going to be taking your civilization and moving them from wherever and dropping them off onto the planet once it's ready for people. So for each one of these ships that you flip over to the backside, that's 1 population cube you can drop off on a planet, and then thus populate that area and become more of a productive civilization. So that is the influence action. Now I know that's a lot. That's a lot of things to keep track of. But you'll find that when you're playing this game and you play through a round or 2, it comes to you very quickly. So again, this is just a quick overview of the rules. I don't expect you to watch this video and be able to go out and play this game right away. I just want to give you a taste of it so you get an idea of the flavor of the game and decide if it's a game that you would like or not. Hey, Paul. We've got Paul Saxberg from Roxley Games on live with us. Thank you for joining us today. So those 6 actions, as I said, players are going around the table, taking one of those actions at a time, moving discs from their influence track onto the actions on their action space, using up more and more of their available cash. And at some point, a player is going to say, okay, I am done. I am passing. And they're going to flip their little tile over to show that they have passed. But as mentioned before, one of the nice features in Eclipse is that player is not out of the round yet. He's just mostly out of the round. So as actions keep on going around and it comes back to this player, he can still take reactions, which are weaker forms of the upgrade action, the build action, and the move action. So normally upgrade, you can upgrade your ship twice. With a reaction, you can only do it once. Build, you can normally do 2 builds. With a reaction, you can only do it once. Move, you can normally get 2 points of movement. You only get 1 point of movement if you're doing a reaction. So they're not as good, but sometimes your fellow player does something that takes you by surprise and catches you off guard, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something about this. And so you still can take influence discs from your board down here, and you can place them on here on these reactions to activate them and still be able to do things, which can be handy. My problem is, as an inexperienced Eclipse player, that usually I have spent the whole round doing as much as I can possibly do, and for me to spend any more of my influence discs to do more things is going to send me into certain bankruptcy. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'm not reacting. But you could. You could react if you want to. So then the nice thing too is after it gives you the rest of the phases here. After everybody has passed in the action phase and everybody's used all their reactions or passed completely, next you'd go into combat. And in my situation, because I maybe foolishly moved my 2 interceptors in with this ancient cruiser, I will have to fight that ancient cruiser now. And we're not going to go into either the whole details of combat. But combat is going to involve rolling dice. And there's all these pretty dice over here of the red, orange, and yellow variety. And those different colors correspond to the different weapons within your ships. My interceptor has 1 ion cannon. That represents that I get 1 yellow die to roll when he attacks. And you'll notice that the ancient cruiser has 2 yellow ion cannons, so he's going to get 2 yellow dice to roll every time he attacks. And so you're going to be rolling dice. On a roll of a 6, it's an automatic hit. On a roll of a 1, it's an automatic miss. Now, all the stuff in between is modifiable. This is where we get back to the ship parts. And if you notice on my cruiser, which unfortunately is not in combat right now, he has an electron computer, which gives him a +1. That means if I roll for the cruiser, I roll for his 1 ion cannon, and he rolls a 5, it is modified to a 6. So that would be very helpful because now I hit on a 5 or a 6. But you'll notice too, this ancient cruiser, he has a computer too that gives him a +1. So he will also hit on a 5 or a 6. Now there's ways to negate that as well in combat. When we looked at ship parts, and I'll move back over here, you'll see there's a couple of shields available in the game, one with a -1, one with a -2. And as you might suspect, when you have shields in your ship blueprint design, when you will offset the player's rolls. So if I have a shield of -1 and you have a computer with a +1, you are going to still need to roll a 6 to hit my ship, because my -1 offsets your +1. So that is basically combat in a nutshell as far as the attacks. Both players are going to be rolling dice in initiative order. Initiative, another thing we haven't really talked about. But there's a way to determine which ship gets to attack first and which ship gets to attack next and all of that. And you're going to be rolling dice, and either ships are going to run away and retreat, or they're going to stay and fight it out. And it's going to go until one faction ships or ship remains in that square, and then they have vanquished the foe, and they now can, if they choose to, take control of that sector by placing one of their influence discs down in that sector and taking it over. But again, as mentioned, controlling a lot of sectors in the galaxy is going to cost you more influence, and more influence costs you more money. But it's like that give and take, because you can't just sit there and not explore. You have to take over areas of the galaxy so you can get access to planets with resources, so you can get more money to pay for things and more materials and science to be able to develop your society. It's a balancing act. And so it's making smart decisions at every point during the game of how much to expand, when to expand, what areas to colonize, what ones to let go, when to go after that ancient ship and try and destroy it, and when to sit back and try and upgrade your ship to make it better and stronger so that you can fight it better than you could. So it's tricky. So now after combat takes place, there is an upkeep phase. Basically, you're using any remaining colony ships to populate any more planets that you want to use. You got one last chance for that. You're going to pay your upkeep cost by looking, one, how much orange population cubes are removed. So how much money do I have? Okay, I'm going to make 3 money, but then depending on how much influence discs are removed, I'm going to have to pay that much. And in this case, if this was really the situation at the end of the round, I'd make 3 money, I'd have to pay 1 money, and my money would go up on this track. So make 2 spaces for the money that I made. Very rarely do I have a lot of money in the positive at the end of the game. At the end of the round, I'm usually, if the goal for me is to have a net of 0 or maybe a little bit of gain. But then again, I don't know that I'm playing it optimally. I've only played this game maybe 5 or 6 times. This is definitely an intense strategy game that you really have to get the hang of managing your resources well. And I might not be playing it as efficiently as I could, to be honest. So that is the upkeep phase, and then in the cleanup phase, we're going to draw more tech tiles and put those on the tech tree board over here so that more technology becomes available again for people to choose. We're going to return all our discs from the actions we've taken and put those back onto our influence track. So those do come back. Like these little guys here. Whoop. He's going to come back. But as I start populating the galaxy, those discs, those stay unless I take an action, unless I bankrupt myself and I have to start pulling those back off and losing control of sectors of the galaxy. So that's where it starts to really get more expensive. And then after that, you start a new round. After you've done the cleanup and everything, you go back to the action phase. The one thing I forgot to mention, the first person to pass in the action phase, they're going to get this first player token right here, and they're going to be the first player for the next round. And so sometimes passing early is important because maybe there's something you want to make sure that you get next time. So therefore, you go ahead and pass before you might necessarily want to pass ordinarily. So that is Eclipse, New Dawn for the Galaxy. And if you're one of the people who have joined kind of in the middle of the video, you can always go back after this video ends. It's going to be available on my story. It's going to be available on my Facebook page for you to go back and watch. I'm also eventually, I don't know how soon I can get to it, but I'm going to upload it to my YouTube channel as well for people to watch. Now, before we close out today, one of the things that I mentioned early on in the video was the reason why I picked Eclipse as the focus of this Rickrolled video is because on Kickstarter right now, the second edition is out there. And I told you I would talk to you about what is better about the second edition. What have they done? And here's the thing. There's not a lot of new things in second edition gameplay-wise. They have kept things, I would say, mostly the same. The game, what you've seen today is probably about 95 to 98% the same type of gameplay that you're going to see in the second edition. So then you might ask, okay, well, why would I care about getting the second edition of Eclipse if it's so similar? Well, for one thing, they have done a lot of little tweaks that when you add them all together makes a big difference. So things that they have done to the rules, they've taken the species boards and the human faction boards, and they have made some tweaks to them, both to the starting ship blueprints, what they start out with technology, different things like that. The tech tree, all the technologies, they've looked at some of those and they've either increased their cost or they've decreased their cost and things like that. So those little tweaks are huge. They've made some changes to the rules itself. Like now if you're the first player to pass, you also get 2 income, which is helpful. And here is one of the huge things to me is they have partnered with the company Game Trays, and they have now a whole bunch of helpful little plastic trays to hold all the bits and pieces. And I'll tell you why that's so great. I bought this Plano box. It's like a fishing tackle box to hold all my ship parts and organize that. And that definitely helps with setup. Normally, if you didn't have this, you'd be placing all these little ship parts out on this board here, actually on the squares that are appropriate for them. Also, like all these little things, these little bits here, you would normally place on the board. I have done that in this case. Normally when I'm playing, I just keep them in my little container and pull them out as I need them. But that increases setup time to have to take all these little squares and put them on the appropriate places here on the board. That's a pain. And then not only that, but this here, this population cube track, I have to take each of these little tiny cubes and place them on the squares on the board when I'm setting up. Each player has to do that. With the new game, and I don't have any pictures to be able to show you live, or I don't have the actual components to show you live, but they actually have real handy trays that manage that stuff, that it's going to make your setup and cleanup so much quicker. Because honestly, one of the barriers to me for playing this game was the fact that it's going to take so long to set up and clean up, and gosh, I don't want to go through the hassle. So that alone makes the second edition so much better than the first edition. Other than that, they have taken some things from the expansions, mainly the Rise of the Ancients expansion that came separately from this box before, and they have now taken some of the best of those things and worked them into the second edition game, which is nice. Unfortunately, one complaint that I have, and I know one complaint that a lot of people have, is they didn't take any of the additional races that you got, or the additional species that you got from the expansion, and work those into the game. But I believe the reason why that is they want to do more expansions later, and so probably either those species or new species will be appearing in other expansions down the road. So that's just the thing we have to deal with. So that is both Eclipse. That is the Kickstarter. I will put a link to the Kickstarter in the comments after I end this video for you to be able to check it out. Or if you go to your Google or your Edge search, just type in Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy, and you'll be able to find the Kickstarter page that way. It's $99 to back at the Terran pledge level, which is basically just you're getting the base game, or you can back at the Galactic Council level for, I think it's $149, and then you get a whole bunch of extra stuff with that, so worth looking at as well. But that is all. So thank you everybody for joining. I know we've had some people that have kind of come and gone, but I hope also many others will be watching this video after the fact. And I hope that you enjoy it. And once again, everybody, if you're watching this video, you have been Rick rolled. Thanks for watching.